el próximo año, y en la medida de lo posible ya vamos a tener resultados haciendo uso de la metodología propuesta por este proyecto internacional. Entonces, no me da más que desearle a la Ibero, al Departamento de Economía, lo mejor en este Congreso y en los que siguen, que espero que sean muchos. Agradecerle mucho a Vito Peragine que esté aquí con nosotros, un especialista en el tema, y ahora se van a dar cuenta por qué. Yo le decía, pues yo no te conocía, pero pues siempre te cito, ¿no? O sea, siempre te lo topas en la literatura, y cuando veníamos de camino del hotel me decía, es que en realidad prácticamente siempre he hecho esto, ¿no? Me decías, desde 1996 he trabajado el tema de igualdad de oportunidades. Entonces, pues estamos con uno de los especialistas principales en el tema, y espero que resulte de mucho provecho para todos ustedes y que sea un marco excelente para arrancar con este nuevo Congreso sobre México. Y solamente una cosa más, esta conferencia magistral forma parte del seminario permanente que organizamos entre el Departamento de Economía, el EQUIDE, que está alojado también aquí en la Ibero, y el SEI desde hace un año, y esta sesión es, digamos, nuestra sesión magistral del año de este seminario permanente. Entonces, muchísimas gracias, Vito, muy bienvenido a México, y gracias a toda la audiencia por estar aquí.
Okay, buenos días a todas y todos. Muchas gracias por la invitación. Estoy muy feliz y muy honorado, ¿se dice honorado?, de ser aquí. Entonces, muchas gracias a Roberto, Isidro y todas. Voy a hablar en inglés, perdona. En mi español se acaba aquí. Con esas palabras. No, me gusta practicarlo cuando puedo, pero para la conferencia prefiero in English. As Roberto was saying, yeah, in fact, I've been working on these topics since the beginning of my career. I started working on this during my PhD thesis. I proposed this to Peter Lambert. I was in New York doing my PhD. And at that time, there was not something like measuring inequality of opportunity as an issue. There were some models on equality of opportunity as an allocation device. There was the famous paper by John Romer on philosophy and public affairs proposing this idea of social justice, but it was not such a topic. So in a sense, it was an heroic choice, because when you choose a topics, there are many students here, there is a trade-off, the novelty and the fact that there is a literature that can cite you, because if nobody cites you, that's a problem, no? So one has to choose, okay, where to go? And in a sense, I decided to choose these topics, but then these topics became, in a sense, successful. Many people started working on inequality of opportunity. So what I'm going to do today is to give you an overview that I hope is not completely useless for people who already work on these topics. There are many people here around that work on these topics. So I will give you some news about some new methodologies, some new, let's say, paths that the literature is undertaking. And but I hope to give you also some motivation, particularly for the students that are here. So let's see if, okay. So this is the outline. First of all, I will address a question, which is a basic question I want to start with, which is why we should measure inequality of opportunity. What are the motivation to study inequality of opportunity, okay? I think most of us are already convinced that we should study social mobility and inequality of opportunity, but we should give them a reason why this. Then I will try to define properly what is inequality of opportunity, what is equality of opportunity, and I will try to define also in a way that we understand that there are different concepts of equality of opportunity, and therefore different ways we can measure it, okay? And in general, the measurement of inequality is a normative exercise, as Tony Atkinson was always telling us. Inequality of opportunity even more, it's a real normative exercise. So we should be aware of what we are defining as equality of opportunity, and then why we are measuring it in that way, okay? So definition. Then I will move to the alternative method to measure inequality of opportunity. And that's the theoretical part. Then I will move to some applied part. I will offer some empirical evidence based on the common project we have, the Global Equality Opportunity Database we are working on, some global pictures, and then, of course, some on Mexico. And here, so I was not, I didn't have much choice, so I chose Mexico. That's to give you an idea of what we have in that database. And then I will I will propose an extension, okay? And I will tell you about this during the talk and some conclusion. So let's start with the motivation. In the literature on inequality in general, okay, now, first of all, there is a lot of attention on inequality, I think, in the economics profession, much more than it was 20 or 30 years ago, okay? I remember a lecture by Tony Atkinson at the Royal Academic Society in the end of the 90s. He was complaining for the fact that inequality was not present in the economist profession. Okay, now it's not like that. I don't know if it is because of Piketty or because of inequality in most Western countries increased in the last decades. So economists, realize that, so start working on inequality. Anyway, inequality now is a topic in economic profession, and you can realize it by looking at the journal, the article, and so on and so forth. When you look at the descriptive measure of inequalities, there are two reactions in general. One which says, okay, inequality is too high, we should do something, and that's mainly for, let's say, fairness reason, for distributive justice reason. But then there are those who say, okay, but some inequality is necessary because of incentives, because the market works like that. So if there is no inequality, the market doesn't work. So it's a natural effect on market. So then the problem becomes, okay, we observe a certain degree of inequality, we observe some evolution, but what is the optimal level of inequality? When we can say that inequality is too much or it is too low, and we can, we are happy with that. So the point is, what is the optimal level of inequality? What is the acceptable level of inequality in a society? Now, in a sense, the inequality opportunity literature give an answer to this by changing the question, okay? And in fact, what the main contribution of inequality opportunity is this. I give a quote here from a very beautiful survey paper that John Romer and Alain Tranois wrote a few years ago. What they say, they refer to the philosophical literature, but this is in general true also for the economic literature. They say, the most important contribution of philosophical egalitarian thought during the last 40 years is the distinction between acceptable and unacceptable inequality. So that is the main contribution of this literature to the economics of inequality. To say that it's not the problem what is the optimal level of inequality, but what inequalities are acceptable and which inequalities are not acceptable. Okay, so we change the question, and then we give a different answer. So there are three main reasons why we could be interested in inequality opportunity. One is linked to consideration of justice, fairness, distributive justice, and that is where the political philosophy literature, gave a contribution during the 80s and the 90s. This was a literature which was concerned with a criticism to welfarism and consequentialism, which are, by the way, the building blocks of our welfare economics apparatus. Okay, so basically, the criticism was that with the consequentialism, you evaluate a state of affairs by looking only at the consequences, at the final outcomes, without considering the process by which that social state is generated. But the process is relevant to give a judgment in terms of fairness, okay? So you should evaluate the way in which a given allocation of resources is obtained to say something on the justice, on the fairness of that allocation, okay? And then there was the necessity to reconcile egalitarianism with the respect of individual responsibility, okay? So this was basically the problem they were concerned with. And I quote here the most influential contribution in political philosophy in those years. So John Rawls, for sure, Amartya Sen, Dworkin, Arneson, and Cohen. There are subtle differences, between these, between the proposals, but they have in common the idea that we should distinguish between fair and unfair inequalities, and that the unfair inequalities are inequality of opportunities. So to say it with Amartya Sen words, when we ask equality of what, the answer should be opportunities rather than final outcomes, okay? So that is one category or reason. But the interest in equality opportunity can have also some instrumental reasons, okay? And those are related to the economic growth. So you know that there is a huge literature on the effect of inequality on growth. Is it good for growth? Is it bad for growth? And during the 90s, mainly at the beginning of this century, there was an important empirical literature and also theoretical literature trying to understand the mechanism and the evidence on this. So the idea here, again, is that there are some inequalities which are good for growth and some other inequalities which are harmful for growth, okay? So maybe one reason of the inconclusiveness of the economic literature on that relation is that they put together all the inequalities. Maybe if we distinguish between some inequalities and other inequalities, we can have some more neat results, okay? And there are some empirical work with which address this problem explicitly. Honestly, I must say we're not still there, you know, to have a clear picture of what is the empirical conclusion, but that is certainly a path to undertake. And the key challenge, of course, here is to have comparable data on circumstances and advantages and outcomes in order to perform this kind of cross-section analysis. And well, in a sense, the database we are working on is something that could be used for this. And I will say something on this later on. Third motivation. Even if you are not an economist or if you are not a philosopher, well, it happens that the distinction between good and bad inequalities is a matter of of fact for many people. So there is 2 points. The first, there is now some well-established evidence that individuals value fairness. So the idea of fairness is part of what individuals care about, okay? And there is some experimental evidence on this now. It's quite robust and is well established. Second, what do people mean by fairness? Different concept, of course, but there is a common idea that comes out when you look at experimental papers and also quasi-experimental papers, that people make a distinction between inequalities that come from individual effort and inequalities that come from inherited exogenous circumstances, okay? So even if they didn't study the John Romer paper or John Rawls' book, they have this idea in mind, okay? So it seems that this concept of inequality opportunity is capturing the intuition of people in general, okay? So suppose we are convinced that inequality opportunity, there are some reasons to study inequality opportunity, intrinsic or instrumental. Can we then measure it in a rigorous way? Can we define it in a rigorous way? And that is what this literature does, the literature that I'm trying to summarize now. In a survey paper with Chico Ferreira, we and now next slides are really based on this paper, we distinguish between 2 approaches to inequality opportunity in the theoretical literature. What we call a direct approach and an indirect approach. And then we distinguish the indirect into an ex-ante approach, an ex-post approach. So I will follow the same line to illustrate. The direct approach was developed during the 90s. It was mainly based on Amartya Sen theory of functionings and capabilities, and this defense of the principle of freedom of choice. Okay, so in those papers, in that literature, the opportunities are modeled in an explicit way. So the idea is that you have a population of individuals. Each individual is endowed with a set of opportunities from which it will choose in a second moment. Okay, so you have 2 moments in time. In the first moment, you have a set of opportunities. In the second moment, you will choose which one you prefer. Okay, so you will have a distribution of set of opportunities. So they are modeled in an abstract way. So then the problem becomes that of characterizing measures of inequality in these profiles distribution of opportunity sets. Of course, this requires to have a matrix of opportunity sets. So how do we rank opportunity sets? When we measure inequality of income, we have a standard matrix of income from the lowest to the highest. But when we talk about set of opportunities, how do we rank them? Okay, and so that requires, first of all, to define a matrix and a measure of opportunity sets. And so there are some papers. Here I quote only the first one, which is Patanek and Chu 90, in which they characterize axiomatically a measure of opportunity set. And you have many other papers on that. And then you have some papers on ranking profile of opportunity sets. There is a Kranich, FAO, Waymark, and myself. I give a contribution to that literature. So this literature is very elegant. It's very mathematical in its characteristics, and well, it's beautiful literature. The problem is it didn't really develop any empirical application. Why was that? For a conceptual problem. That opportunities, if you look at opportunities before they are realized, they are by definition unobservable because they are counterfactual. What you will observe is the one you will choose after the first moment, okay? So in fact, it's not really a mystery, it's not a surprise that that literature didn't have almost any empirical application. So maybe the problem was that we should try to infer opportunities from some observable behavior of individuals, okay? From observable behaviors on outcomes, on circumstances in which the choices are made, and so on. And that is exactly what the indirect approach does. So this literature stays there. It's interesting, but didn't develop any empirical application. So what about the indirect approach, which is the one which is basically used today? So this is based on three independent proposals that were made during the beginning of the 90s by Mark Fleurbe, by John Romer, and Dirk van der Geer. So Mark Fleurbe was working on fair division models in a social choice tradition. Okay, you have a resource to be allocated among individuals. How do you allocate it according to some fairness principles? Okay, John Romer proposed a model of optimal taxation, and it was very much inspired by the Ronald Dworkin proposal in the philosophical literature. And Van der Geer proposed a social welfare function embodying the principle of equality and responsibility. So they have in common this basic structure, okay, that I'm discussing now. So consider a population and consider that for each individual, you have an objective measure of individual advantage, okay? Something like income or consumption or wealth or health, okay? Something that you can measure with in an objective way. And then assume that all the factors determining this individual advantage can be classified into either circumstances, which are factors outside the individual responsibility, or effort, factor of individual responsibility. This is a production function, so it's not a utility function, so there is not this utility of effort, okay? Effort to contribute positively to the TX. So here, because the usual question that comes is, okay, but effort is depending on circumstances, okay? So we are aware of that, and when we say effort here, we refer to the clean part of effort that is not affected by circumstances, okay? So if you have an empirical measure of effort that is affected by circumstances, you should clean for it in some way, and there are some ways that the literature proposes, okay? So having this function, the equality of opportunity then can be formalized into two distinct principles. One is the compensation principle, so you should compensate for the circumstances, and that is the egalitarian part of the theory. And then the reward principle, so you should reward the effort. And that is, of course, the responsibility part of the principle. So in a sense, this is really a theory which is in the middle between egalitarianism and the libertarianism, because it takes both and try to combine both. These two principles, compensate and reward, they are independent. They are clearly independent, consider a outcome egalitarian distribution in which you compensate for everything, then you satisfy compensation by you are violating the reward. Okay. On the other hand, consider a completely laissez-faire principle in which, laissez-faire distribution in which you do not interfere with anything, then you satisfy the reward by you are violating the compensation. So they are independent. They are conflicting. There were some papers in the 90s in which you show that if that function is not separable, you cannot satisfy both principles at the same time, okay, in a given domain. And they are plural in the sense that you can give the compensation and the reward different meanings, different declinations. That's what I'm going to do now. So how you can define more precisely the compensation and the reward. And from this conceptual operation, then come different approaches to the measurement of inequality opportunity. So compensation. This is I find it very clear to show and to explain what are the two compensation principles. So consider society can be represented by a matrix where there are n rows and m columns. Okay, what are the rows? The rows are distribution of income for types. What is a type? A type is a set of individuals with the same circumstances. So you made a partition of individuals according to the circumstances. So for instance, in the first group, in the first type, there are all women and with low educated parents. Second type, men, low educated parents. Third type, men, high educated parents, and so on. Okay? So individuals with the same circumstances. On the columns, you have tranches, which are set of individuals with the same effort level. Okay? Now you can look at the matrix, at the population, from the rows or from the column. So from the rows, which is before knowing and without knowing the effort, you just know the circumstances and you know the distribution of outcomes for the circumstances. Okay? And so from this ex-ante view, we call it ex-ante because we do not observe effort. Okay? So from this ex-ante view, you define equality of opportunity. How? What you do here, basically, you interpret the distribution of outcomes within a type as the opportunity set open to each individual in that type. And that is the main conceptual, let's say, move of this literature. So you do not observe opportunities, you infer the opportunities of each individual by looking at the realizations of individuals in the same circumstances as him. That's the main, okay? So if you buy this, then these rows are opportunity sets, and then when there is a great opportunity, when these rows are equal. So the distribution of X conditioned to C are equals, okay? A and C. And then you focus, in terms of inequality, to inequality between these rows, between the types. In the ex-post approach, so ex-post compensation, you don't need to observe circumstances, but you need to observe effort. So suppose you observe effort, you have for each effort level the individuals with the same effort, okay? They will have different outcomes. Any difference in outcomes for individual with the same effort is unfair because can only be due to circumstances. So you declare unfair those inequalities. So where there is inequality opportunity, where there is any inequality in each column, in each tranche. So there is a great opportunity if at each tranche the distribution is egalitarian. So basically you focus on inequality within tranches. Okay? So the compensation principle, which is the one that asks to compensate for the circumstances, either is applied ex ante, so you try to reduce inequality between the rows, between the types, or ex post, so you reduce inequality within each effort class. Okay? What about reward? As I said, reward is about, as the word says, rewarding effort. You make an effort, society should reward for it. But how much should reward? So here you have a very different interpretation of the reward principle. One, which is many times implicit in the empirical analysis we do, is the utilitarian approach. That is to say, any inequality in outcomes that comes from different effort is fair. So once we have compensated for the circumstances, any resulting and residual inequality is fair, okay? So rewarding effort in this interpretation means that you are neutral with respect to any differences in the reward pattern of effort, okay? It's quite extreme if you think about it, no? A second approach says, I buy the compensation principle, okay, but I don't say anything about the residual inequality. I don't say that I'm averse to it, but I'm not saying that they are all fine, okay? So this is an agnostic view. A third position is that you should express also some inequality aversion with respect to the residual part, so the effort-based inequality. And we will spend some more words on this later. Now, so different compensation principle, ex ante, ex post, different reward principles, utilitarian, agnostic, inequality averse. Now, unfortunately, all these principles, they are not compatible, okay? So in a paper with Mark Flerbey about 10 years ago, we show that, in fact, ex ante and ex post compensation clash in general. I mean, for a very big domain. In fact, all the domain of this distribution in which there is some overlapping between the rows, okay? Only if there is a first order dominance or one rows or the other, there is no clash. Otherwise, there is a clash. That means that you cannot find one allocation or one measure of inequality which satisfies both ex ante and ex post. You have to choose either ex ante or ex post, okay? Second, what about compensation and reward? We show that, in fact, ex post compensation clashes with the reward, while ex ante compensation doesn't clash with the reward, when reward is interpreted in terms of utilitarian reward, okay? So basically, either you endorse an ex ante view in compensation or you look for a second best solution, okay? That's the thing. And the empirical analysis is basically, you know, sometimes explicitly, sometimes implicitly, really following, you know, these three of principles. Okay, now let's go to the measurement of inequality opportunity. When you measure inequality, you can start from partial orderings and then going to scalar measures, or the other way around. I like starting from partial ordering. That's the way I learned about inequality. You start from the Lorentz curve, and then you define what are the inequality indices which are consistent with the Lorentz curve, and then you choose one, and you know, that is because of robustness, of course, you know, and because of the link between the Lorentz curve and the welfare. So if we take the same path, so we start with the partial orderings. So let's start with a social welfare function which captures the idea of inequality opportunity we just formulated, okay? So in some old papers, I propose a utilitarian, in the sense of additive social welfare function, in which you first aggregate the utilities within a type, which are these, okay? And then you aggregate the types. So you have a double aggregation. In both cases, you have an additive formulation. You assume a partially symmetric function in the sense that the utility is the same within a type, but they are different between types, okay? And then you impose some properties on the utility functions that capture your fairness principle. Okay, the first is monotonicity. We are talking about social welfare, so having more, you know, higher income is good. What about the fairness principle? Ex ante compensation, we said, is about inequality between types. So how do we translate this principle? By saying that the marginal contribution of income at a lower type is higher. Okay, so a given level of income, if you are in a lower type, the marginal increase in social welfare is higher than you have in a higher type. Okay, so this imposes basically an inequality aversion between the types. That is the expression of ex ante compensation. What about reward? If we endorse the utilitarian reward, so the strong version, so it means that any inequality within a type is basically irrelevant for our social function. So you impose neutrality within types, you have that the function is linear, okay? So the second derivative is 0. So if you impose this condition to this function, you ask an unanimity among all the utility functions satisfying these properties, you obtain this dominance condition. What is this dominance condition? Basically, if you have two distributions of incomes, okay, you partition two distributions into types, the way I said, you calculate the mean of each type, then you compare the distribution of the means according to the generalized Lorentz dominance. Okay, so that is the partial orderings that capture the ex-ante compensation and the utilitarian reward. Okay, what if we don't endorse the utilitarian reward? So we don't endorse the strong vision that all inequality due to effort are fair. Basically, you cancel the utilitarian reward, you keep everything else the same. You obtain this condition. You have a sequential dominance, like the generalized Lorentz dominance, but now instead of comparing just the mean, you have to compare all the distribution according to first order stochastic dominance. So at each step, you have to check for first order dominance. First step, second step, you have to add the type one after the other. At the end, you will have all the distribution and all the distribution. Every time you check for the full first order dominance of the distribution. Okay. In a sense, these two partial orderings are really the counterpart of what the generalized Lorentz dominance does with respect to the usual inequality ordering with scalar indices. Okay. So the next step is, in fact, the scalar measure of inequality opportunity. Now, here there are different approaches. I'm not going to explain all of it, to show all of them. And also for the partial orderings, there are also ex-post approaches that I didn't mention. So in a scalar measure, basically, the inequality analysis is a two-step procedure. In the first step, software distribution, you transform it in a counterfactual distribution that reflects only the unfair inequality. And then we measure inequality in that counterfactual distribution, okay? And you can define an absolute and relative inequality opportunity. Of course, here the normative moment is how you define the counterfactual distribution. And here, according to the principles you want to endorse, you have a different counterfactual distribution. Not only the principles, also the empirical methodology you want to use, okay? So according to the, normative and methodology, and here you have normative data-driven model selection, you have a different counterfactual distribution. And to that distribution, then you apply an index of inequality. Now, let me just mention two methods. One is the non-parametric method, the other is the parametric method. Both of them based on the ex-ante compensation and the utilitarian reward. So in a sense, they are linked to the first partial ordering. Okay, I showed you. So the non-parametric method is very simple. Basically, it's just the application of the concept of inequality between groups that we know for inequality decomposition. So how do you make an inequality between group analysis in a distribution partition into groups? You substitute the mean of the group to each individual in that group, and you measure inequality in that new smoothed distribution. Okay, that is the between types method, the non-parametric. The parametric version of this, basically, it was proposed for database in which the groups become too small, and so the statistical properties they are not exceptional, is estimating by OLS, where by the regressor you put all the circumstances you have. Okay, so this is basically the parametric counterpart of the mean that you have here. Okay, and again you measure inequality in this counterfactual distribution. Okay? So the crucial point here, of course, is what you put here, is what you put in this model. How to choose this model, okay? Which regressor you put here, which doesn't only mean which circumstances you consider. It means also how do you treat the circumstances. Consider parental education. So consider you can have 6 levels of education, or you can choose to have just 2 levels of education. Consider ethnicity. You can divide the population into 5 groups, into 4 groups, 2 groups, and so on and so forth. These choices that have, of course, a clear normative meaning, they have also a statistical effect, because the groups you are working with become smaller and smaller. The more the circumstances you use, the smaller become the groups. Okay. So in the literature, there has been a lot of discussion on this, and so there are 2 ways you can address this problem. One is normative, the other is statistical. From a normative point of view, okay, you measure inequality opportunity in Mexico. You choose the circumstances according to the characteristics of your encuesta, okay, and the statistical properties. Then you want to compare the inequality opportunity in Mexico with inequality opportunity in Italy, say, okay. How do you make this comparison? Okay, there is no such a thing like inequality opportunity full stop. What we are measuring here is inequality opportunity condition to some controls. By the way, I didn't say it. We are not doing any causal identification here. Okay, this should be clear. I think it's clear. We don't make any attempt to. On the other hand, I think that detecting some correlation and robust correlation is the first step to make any effort to understand mechanism which are behind. So just will not make confusion. So we don't do causal analysis here. But so let's go back to the point. So how do we compare inequality opportunity in the state in Italy and in Mexico? Suppose we have used different circumstances. Someone says, okay, but no, we should use the same circumstances to make it comparable. But then the problem arises because the circumstances sometimes are country specific. So if you go to measure inequality opportunity in India, we worked recently with the World Bank to a report on South Asia, okay? And of course, you cannot go to measure inequality opportunity in India without considering the caste. But the caste doesn't exist in Italy, so you cannot even define that, okay? On the other hand, some circumstances have different meanings in different countries, okay? So on the one hand, you want to be country specific because at the end, what you're measuring is a social phenomena. So it really depends on the social structure of the country you are considering. On the other hand, you want to have comparability between the estimates. And we know, this was one of the first thing that was noticed, that as any decomposition analysis, you know that the more the regressors you have, the higher will be the variability you can explain. So the higher will be the inequality opportunity. Okay. So suppose you measure inequality opportunity in Mexico today with 10 circumstances. You add 1 circumstance, the inequality opportunity cannot but increase. Okay. So the estimate of inequality opportunity is monotonically increasing with the number of controls. So here becomes this becomes an issue here, because from one end it's a normative exercise. So you want to use circumstances which are politically salient in the country you are measuring it. So you want to give an answer to the policymakers and to the public opinion of what you're measuring in a given country. On the other hand, you want to have a comparability with other estimates with other countries. And that is the normative consideration, okay? So I'm not saying what is the best solution. I'm saying what are the problems. And then, case by case, the practitioner should evaluate what's the best strategy to measure inequality opportunity. On the other hand, there are some statistical considerations. So here there are some papers which have been developed in the last years that have clarified as the inequality opportunity estimates not only have a downward bias, which is due to unobservability of circumstances, the thing I was saying here, but they also have an upward bias, which is due to the sample size. which we are working. So then how you trade off between this upward bias and this downward bias, and how do you trade off between comparability and country-specific circumstances? It seems to me that the data-driven methodologies which have been developed in these last years have an answer to both questions, okay? And now I'm not explaining here this methodology. I'm not an expert on that, but one point I want to make, those are the methodology we also use for database we have, is that data-driven methodology, in a sense, they let the machine, which is a machine learning approach, choose the best model, okay, on the basis of a prediction ability of the model. And this model can be different from country to country, okay? So how do you save comparability? You save comparability because you feed the machine with the same set of controls, okay? But at the end, you have different models. So from a normative point of view, you still can complain on it because you say, okay, we are considering inequality opportunity with different set controls. Okay, but the answer is yes, but we are feeding with the same. So again, I'm not saying what is the best. I'm saying what are the issues one should consider. So for some exercises, comparability is the main issue. So then the machine learning, the data-driven in general approach are good. That's why we are using it for some other cases. You want to focus on some circumstances because maybe the research question was exactly starting on some circumstances. So then you are forced to use a given model specification. So it depends really on what is your research question. Just one point on this talk was supposed to be inequality opportunity, and intergenerational mobility is on inequality opportunity. So that's why I wrote at least one slide on intergenerational mobility, just to say one thing that, as you can imagine, is the inequality opportunity is very much linked to the intergenerational mobility concept. And from a formal point of view, you can notice this. It's this, which is the equation you use in the parametric estimation of inequality opportunity, is very much like the Galton regression, where you use just one circumstance, which is the father income. Okay? So if instead of having a vector of circumstances here, you have just one father income, that's the Galton regression. So you understand that it's very, 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 very close to the concept of origin independence in intergenerational mobility. The main difference is this one. Apart from some technical things which are minor, the main difference is that we use a set of circumstances. In intergenerational mobility, you use just one. So if you think that the parental income is predictive of all other inherited circumstances, then the two exercises are saying the same. If you don't believe that, so there is something else, then we are doing something else. And in terms of empirics, here there is a graph from the equal chances database, which was the database before the GEOM they're producing now. So here is just a plot where we have inequality opportunity, relative inequality opportunity on the horizontal, and intergenerational earnings mobility on the vertical. And you see that they are correlated, but they are not perfectly correlated. So there are some differences. Okay. So for some countries, you have, like Mexico, for instance, with a very high level of intergenerational. Well, this is the complement of mobility, so it's immobility and inequality opportunity. The same is the US. Okay. So we are not capturing exactly the same concept. Of course, they are related. Okay. Can I know how much time do I have? If I'm going.
45 more minutes.
Okay. Bye. Okay. So now some data. Okay. Finish with the theoretical part. Some data. Then I will have some more theoretical part at the end of the talk on the extension of inequality opportunity approach. So this is the database we've been advertising often during the talk. So this is a big effort by the LSE, University of Bari, but as you heard before, not only us, some other institutions that are helping us, like the one in Mexico City, the Center of Espinosa, and some other institution around the world. So this is basically a big effort in which we produce and publish estimates of inequality opportunity for as many countries as we can. At the moment, we have 72 countries, which cover about 67% of the world population. There is China there, so that's why there's a big jump in the population coverage. We use about 200 household surveys. For some countries, we have more than 40 years of observation. So for some other countries, we have just 1 year observation. So with our best, we not only estimate inequality opportunity, we also identify the role played by the different circumstances and the groups that have the most and the less access to opportunities, okay? And we are working now on intergenerational mobility estimates, okay? So that's the work we're doing now. In addition to enlarge more and more the coverage. Now, when you build a data set, you always have a trade-off between, coverage and comparability. So which countries we should include, which countries we should not include according to the data availability. So these are the choices we made, okay? So we included the country if and only if they had at least these characteristics, the database. So a minimum of 1,200 observation. As an outcome, we use either household income. By household income, we mean disposable income, corrected for CPI, etc. And for some countries, mainly the developing countries, the African countries, we use expenditure, okay? So most of the countries we have income, some countries we have consumption for the usual reason, because you don't have a stable and robust income information. As for the circumstances, which is the crucial part here, we ask each country to have at least 5 of the following 7 circumstances: age of birth, gender, parental occupation, parental education, and one of ethnicity, race, religion of the parents. Okay, so at least 5 of those. For the methodology, we use both ex ante and ex post approaches. We use ex post in the sense that we do not have information on effort, but we deduce the information on effort from the distribution of outcome within a type. We use the Romer approach. Maybe I will, if I have time, I will say something on this. We use data-driven methods, and we use 2 inequality measures, Gini and mean log deviation. Okay, and if there is time in the discussion, then we can discuss about which measure is best to use. Okay, this is an overview in which you have here all the countries for which the outcome is income, and here all the countries for which the outcome is consumption. We have an estimate which goes from 20% to almost 70%. Here's the Gini, okay? So the proportion of the Gini index which is attributed to the circumstances, okay? So it's the ratio between the Gini of the smoother distribution and the Gini of the total distribution. And here is Mexico, as you can see. Then we will have some more data on Mexico. And you have some heterogeneity among countries, also within a given region, okay? Now, you can really play with this number to have an overall view of what is inequality opportunity in the world. So one question we asked, and that was a general question we asked before, is the following. What is the relationship in empirical terms between inequality opportunity and income inequality? You know that Miles Kovac gave a talk here. I'm sure we talked about the Great Gatsby curve. So the relation between intergenerational mobility and income inequality. So here we do the same exercise, but instead of using intergenerational mobility, we use inequality opportunity, okay? And what we observe here, there is an increasing trend here. There is an increasing positive relationship, sorry. There is a positive relationship. Notice that here you have a relative inequality opportunity. So there is nothing mechanic here. It's not absolute inequality opportunity. So it's the ratio of inequality explained by circumstances. So there is no mechanics here. So then there is something in the economics that explains why in the countries where you have more inequality, you also have more a higher portion of that inequality, which is explained by circumstances. Okay. In a sense, it's not really surprising because today's opportunity, as is written here, shape tomorrow's outcomes. On the other hand, today's outcomes shape tomorrow's opportunities. The income differences today between households, there are different opportunities for the children of that household, of course, in a dynamic setting. So that's not surprising. What we can notice here is that this positive relationship is mainly due to the position of groups of countries rather than within group countries. So it's mainly the difference between Africa, Asia, Europe, Latin America, North America that make this positive relation. So it's a relation which talks about more stage of development rather than within groups inequality. Because within group inequality, you don't detect a positive relation. Yeah, to be honest, there is if you use an absolute measure, but then there is a mechanical, of course, mechanism. So this, in a sense, has driven us to ask what is the relationship between, just at this, this global level, at just a correlation between inequality opportunity and the degree of development of a given economy. So as you know, there is a fundamental hypothesis in development economics about the relationship between inequality and development, which is the Kuznets hypothesis. So here is the Kuznets curve with our data. Okay, so we have log of GDP per capita on the horizontal and our inequality of opportunity. Sorry, our inequality, total inequality on the vertical. So this is the standard classic Kuznets curve. And so it has the usual inverted U shape that you could expect. Kuznets in his article in the 50s, he was describing a model in which you have the passage from one sector economy to two sector economy. So basically from the agriculture to the agriculture plus industry economy. It was explaining this dynamics of inequality, first increasing and then decreasing, as an effect of the move of individual from the low productivity economy, so the agriculture, to the industrial sector. And then when everybody moved, so the agricultural sector became very small, then the inequality started to decrease. Okay, so it has a very clear mechanism in mind. Now, this hypothesis has been tested in many different ways during these years, both for a country or in a cross section. In a cross section, the idea is that you take the countries of different areas of the world as a representative of different stages of development. Okay, so in a sense, you use a cross section because you don't have a time series. Now, we are in fact puzzled by this, and we are trying to work on a model in which we try to understand what are the mechanisms behind a given relation between development and inequality of opportunity. Now, we are still working on a model, so it's still a work in progress, so I will not say anything on this. But let me just show some results on this, empirical results. This is the opportunity Kuznets curve. So you have here the log of GDP per capita and the equality opportunity on the vertical. And you have again inverted U shape, okay? Now, in a sense, so even the relation between inequality opportunity and development looks to have the same dynamics, but the mechanism has to be a different one. But in a sense, these results is a product of the standard Kuznets and the great Gatsby curve. So if you think to a triangular relationship between income inequality, opportunity inequality, and development, of course, if you have a great Gatsby and if you have a Kuznets curve of the standard inequality, you should have an inequality opportunity Gatsby curve. We compared the two, and in fact, what we have, so this is the quadratic formula estimates, and the coefficient of the the second term is as we expected. It's negative, it's significant. But what we observe here is that the standard Kuznets curve is steeper than the inequality opportunity curve, okay? Which is not exactly what you expect theoretically from the two first curves. So this is just, to show you one possible path of development of these things. And we are working now on making this empirical analysis stronger, more robust, with some robustness checks, and working on the theoretical model. Okay, let's go back to the inequality opportunity across the world. Here I identify the Mexico value of inequality opportunity. This is the relative measure. So in the website, you can choose which measure you want, which country, the ex-ante or ex-post, and the relative or absolute approach, and so on and so forth. So you can play and have, all the measures you want. Here you have Mexico, was a portion of inequality opportunity over the total inequality of 43%, which is, so I choose just two countries to compare, is higher than US, is smaller than Colombia. Here you have all the values for Latin America. I don't ask you to read, but you can just have a look. And then in the database, you can look at each country, okay? And in addition to the value of inequality opportunity, you can look at the structure of inequality opportunity within each country. So what are the groups which are more disadvantaged, and what are the so here is the tree for the Mexico. Let me identify. So basically, these three, I don't know if you can read it. Here is the father education. This is mother education and sex. So basically, each node in the tree tells you, which one is most correlated with the outcome. Okay. So having here the father education at the first point means that the father education is the most correlated variable with the outcome that we have among all the others. Then it comes to mother correlation and the mother education sex. Then you have the less significant one. And you find it also here. Here you have the different types, okay? They are all from the left to the right on the horizontal for the average income, okay? From the poorest types to the richest types, and here in terms of population. So here you see that the most, the most deprived groups are groups with low educated parents, okay? The factor of indigenous, non-indigenous women doesn't play really much a role if compared to the education of the parents. And this is reflected also here, okay? So basically, with this map, you can have a look of what is the structure of inequality opportunity in the country, what are the most important factors. And you can have then an additional evidence of this by the Shapley value decomposition, in which we ask what are the most salient circumstances explaining inequality opportunity. And again, here you have a confirmation that father occupation and mother education, father education and mother education play the most important role, followed by father occupation and then all the others: sex, mother occupation, ethnicity, and birth areas. Okay? So those are, let's say, this is the hierarchy of circumstances in Mexico. Okay? And you can do the same exercise for all the countries. Okay, so let me go to the final part of this talk. And for the final part of the talk, I take what is the main criticism that, from my point of view, has been addressed to the inequality opportunity approach. The main criticism has two phases. One is normative, the other is empirical. The empirical, we already discussed about that. When we measure inequality opportunity, we measure inequality with respect to a certain set of circumstances, okay? So you will never be able to observe all the circumstances. So your measure of inequality opportunity, it's always a lower bound of the true inequality opportunity. So that means that if you, in the communication and if in the public discourse, you say that inequality of opportunity in your country is, let's say, 25%, okay, you are transferring a message which says that 75% is fair. 75% of inequality is fair, okay? This is due to the fact that, you measure only the part that you can observe, okay? So you should be very careful the way in which you... But then there is a normative argument. All these measurement analysis, they are based on this utilitarian version of the reward principle, which says that any inequality due to effort are fair. Now, is this really acceptable? Now, consider that Roberto and I have the same circumstances. He accepted a little bit more effort than me, just a little bit more, but because of this tiny extra effort, he had a huge extra income more than me. Okay, so is this huge inequality in outcomes justified because of the small effort difference? So the point is there any income inequality stemming from different effort to be accepted because we accept the responsibility? Shouldn't be any proportionality rule, let's say, that should link the reward to the effort you put in practice, okay? So this criticizes basically, the substance of the reward principle and says that if you accept the compensation principle, then you could also put some inequality aversion with respect to other inequalities, okay? But you should, in a way, keep the compensation principle. So these two criticisms, in fact, have been at the center of some papers, one by Campbell and Wagstaff have been very influential, which really criticizes the use of inequality opportunity as an index of social progress. So, what should be the answer? If you want to take this criticism, seriously, what is the answer? So, first of all, from my point of view, is to communicate in a rigorous way what we are measuring, okay? Which is not inequality opportunity. But inequality opportunity, given this set of control, always to be clear about this. But maybe not only that. In fact, okay, the usual answer has been, to use a richer data set and alternative computation techniques to enlarge the range of unfair inequalities. But an alternative methodological approach has been that of combining inequality of opportunity with some other fairness principles, okay? One is a very nice paper by Juve, Campbell, and Pekel, in which they combine equality of opportunity and freedom for poverty. So basically what they say is that we should avoid to consider poor people responsible for the status of poor because of the many errors we can make in measurement and in normative judgment, okay? So what they propose is that a fair distribution is a distribution in which nobody is below a poverty threshold, no matter what the effort, blah, 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 and above the poverty threshold, then we could talk about inequality opportunity, okay? So a fair distribution is a distribution in which everybody goes to the poverty threshold, and above that, there is equality of opportunity. Okay, that is one way. Another answer, if you want, is in the approach I explained before, in which we recognize the compensation principle, but we are agnostic with respect to the reward principle. Okay, so we are not expressing inequality neutrality with respect to the residual inequality. Okay, and so you have that sequential first order dominance. Okay, so we are not saying that all of us inequality they are fair. In a recent paper, that's what I want to conclude with this, with Mark Fleurbe and Domenico Bonamarco, we propose a fairness principle in which both inequality of opportunity and inequality of outcomes play a role, but priority is recognized to inequality of opportunity. To say it differently, we impose inequality aversion between the groups, so ex-ante inequality of opportunity. As for the residual inequality, we express inequality aversion, but the degree of inequality aversion is lower than the degree of inequality aversion between the groups. So we have two levels of inequality aversion, one which is higher than the other, expressing our opportunity egalitarian ethics. Okay, so what we do, we axiomatically characterize a family of social welfare functions that capture this prioritarian view. We define indices of unfair inequality, and then we have some empirical application. Let me just show. Okay, that's the family we characterize. I'm not going into the details. I will do it tomorrow, Roberto, at the seminar. That's the paper I'm presenting. So what we do here, basically, we characterize a social welfare function, which is not additive, okay? It's separable. And so we have two aggregations here. The small f, they aggregate income within types, and the capital F, they aggregate the welfare of types. And what we obtain is that the capital F is more inequality averse than small f. So the degree of inequality aversion between types is higher than the degree of inequality aversion within types. Okay, and what is at the heart of this characterization result? I want to show you this. Is a transfer axiom, okay, which basically says this. Consider two types. So here you have the rank at the horizontal and the income on the vertical. So you have 4 individuals, okay, in each type. And so you consider the advantage type and the disadvantage type. And consider there is a first order dominance of the advantage over the disadvantage. Okay? So two types, the rich type, first order dominates the poor type. Okay? So at each rank. Now, consider a transfer. This is a regressive transfer from a poor individual to a rich individual in the rich type. This is welfare offending. Okay, so there is a welfare cost for this regressive transfer. Good. Now consider a different transfer, which goes from a poor individual. Which goes from a poor individual to a richer individual, but not only that, it goes from a poor type to a rich type. So this is doubly offensive. Okay, so what we say that this second transfer has a higher welfare cost than the first transfer. So this very simple transfer axiom, together with some other classic axioms, are able to characterize that family of social welfare function. Having characterized that, then we consider normative indices a la Atkinson, which are these, which basically these are very, very, I think they're very nice in the sense that they have two parameters, one expressing inequality aversion within, and the other expressing inequality aversion between types. So you can express these compensation versus reward principles. I finish with one application. We consider inequality opportunity in the United States by looking just at one circumstance, which is the ethnicity of individuals. Okay, so we compare our approach with the full egalitarian approach and with the standard opportunity egalitarian approach. Okay, and so these are the ethnic groups: white, black, Hispanic, Asian, American Indian, and others. We use the PSID, and we have the equalized disposable household income. And so this is the inequality within each group and the overall inequality, okay? And you see that there has been an increasing trend from the 70s to the 2014, which is the last observation we have. And here is the inequality trend. So basically here you have the total inequality, which is increasing. Here is the standard inequality opportunity that we should measure the way in which we do in general. And here is the prioritarian inequality, which is our unfairness definition of inequality, which you have both inequality aversion between and some inequality aversion within types. So the trend you capture is the same as total inequality, but the level is important, which is intermediate. So here you are saying that, you know, the degree of inequality which is unfair is much higher than the standard inequality opportunity. Okay, so conclusions. There are reasons, at least for me, but I hope I have convinced you to think about inequality opportunity as the most salient part of inequality, both for intrinsic and instrumental reasons. Inequality of opportunity can be measured in a rigorous way, but the information requirements are quite strong. They are contingent on the set of controls. They are contingent on normative judgment. So we should always keep in mind these two things. And we have to be cautious with cross-country comparison. I presented the GEOM database, and I presented you some correlation between opportunity inequality and income inequality, and some challenges. First, conceptually, as I tried to say in the last part, attempts have been made recently to combine equality of opportunity and other principles of justice for monitoring social progress. I didn't talk about intertemporal economic opportunity. Most of these models are statics. There is a recent paper I'm working on a model of intertemporal inequality opportunity in which you have circumstances that can change over time in addition to effort. So how do you take into account that? And I discussed a little bit the comparison of data-driven versus normative model specification. Empirically, I think one of the things we'd like to do is a long-term evolution of inequality opportunity, and this is really it's difficult because of data, and of course to have more and better data on the background in the early life, so to result would allow us to have very good estimates of inequality opportunity in a given country. But on many fronts, progress is being made thanks to many people in this room as well. Thank you very much for the attention.
Muchas gracias, Vito, por esta presentación tan estimulante. Sobre todo los que ya llevamos un rato trabajando esto y entonces hacer todo este recuento, integrar todo, recuperar algunas discusiones que tenemos desde hace años. Te agradecemos mucho. Ahora que Vito presentaba lo del proyecto con la Universidad de Bari y la London School, de hecho, una de las cosas que se va a presentar en el informe de movilidad social del próximo año del SEI, cuando liberemos la base de datos de 2023, es no únicamente aportar para el mapa internacional a nivel nacional, sino que vamos a tener la posibilidad de hacer la desagregación para 5 grandes regiones del país, ¿no? Entonces, en ese sentido, México irá dando un paso adelante para hacer estas comparaciones de cross-section, en este caso intrarregional al país, ¿no? Y otra cosa que vamos a incorporar, si todo funciona bien, es una instrumentación de la propuesta de Juve, Cambur y Peichel, ¿no? A ver también cómo sale, ¿no? Entonces, pues bueno, la mesa está puesta para que el público tome la palabra, haga preguntas a Vito, y no sé, Isidro, ahí cómo vamos a llevar el orden. Vale. Por favor. Sí, esperas porque es que tenemos online gente.
Online, pardon.
Sí.
Excellent presentation, and it's also very impressive the data you have gathered, and really congratulations. You mentioned it's well known that the ex post and the ex ante measures, they don't necessarily give similar answers, but now you have these very rich data sets. So have you compared whether the country rankings, how much of the country rankings change between one approach and the other? Have you tried that?
I don't know if I'm Pedro, I'm working in the project too. We do have some estimates on how they change in the database. You can go into the table and you can look at both ex ante and ex post at the same time and try to order them differently and see how they change. We don't have a specific kind of graph where we show it, but you can play around with the data in the database. It's available to see how it changes if you look from an ex post and an ex ante perspective. Yeah.
So we're taking notes of your question. We will do it. Thank you.
My question. On causality.
There is another one.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I am thinking on the intertemporal model that you are developing. And while you were presenting, the question that kept popping was, have you considered in this intertemporal context the incentives of placing policies aiming to establish equality of opportunity? Are there going to be incentives for people in a first generation, second generation, living these kind of conditions to exert effort?
Yeah, no, it's not the paper I'm working on, well, in fact, it's already out as a working paper. It's not dynamic in that sense. So it's dynamic in the sense that you have circumstances which change over time and effort to change over time. So how do you make inequality opportunity measurement in that kind of case? On your question, there are some papers written about 10 years ago by Marc Flerbet and Philippe Maniquet, in which they consider incentives and they consider how equality of opportunity allocation rules, so they work on allocation rules, how they are compatible with incentives and which are the best allocation and with the best equilibria. So there are some, as well, there are some papers on optimal taxation inspired by the equality of opportunity approach, in which of course you have incentives. So you have the dynamic models in the sense you said, with the people who react to the change behavior according to the tax rates. And I can give you a reference. So there are some papers in that kind. I was referring to a different kind of exercise, yes.
Yeah. May I complement just to say that I would guess that the connection to the intertemporal ones comes from the fact that if in a given generation there are certain incentives to exert effort, there is some carry on, right? If I don't exert effort today, the conditions in which my kid is going to be born may generate different inequality of opportunity conditions. So that's where I saw the link with the intertemporal modeling.
Yeah, no, let me complete the answer by saying that the model we are working on the relationship between inequality and development, the one inspired by the Kuznets hypothesis, there we have two generations. They are not overlapping, so just one generation makes the choice about consumption and inheritance, and the inheritance is basically the circumstance of the child, and then from that circumstance the child can choose the sector in which to work, high productivity and low productivity. So in that model we are considering this two generation thing, and so yeah, but it's still it's really working on. I mean, we don't have still a solution, so yeah. Thanks.
Hernan?
Thank you. Great presentation. Two questions. One related a little bit with that. Like once you are intertemporality, then you have this endogenous relationship that you assume at the beginning between circumstance and effort, like that you cannot really assume out anymore, I think. How do you work with that? And from a behavioral point of view, I'm a behavioral and experimental economist. So even in the static environment, how do these measures change when you add social preferences or this utility of like inequality? For the intertemporal part, I assume that you have even more behavioral implications in which like not only the changes in the circumstances, but the beliefs and the expectations of changes in the circumstances will change the distribution of efforts that you will observe exposed. So I don't know if you have answers for this kind of, they are not really questions, but there are more comments.
No, in fact, there are comments. On the second point, I agree with you. On the first, let me just say, as I said before, we're not saying in general in this research that the effort is independent of circumstances, but we say that there is a locus in which there is some definition of effort that is not affected by circumstances. If you don't believe that, then you are a complete determinist in the vision of life, which is a legitimate view. Then, of course, everything is determined by circumstances. Then opportunity egalitarianism coincides with full egalitarianism. if everything is circumstances, there is no such thing like free will, then there is not space of responsibility. But if you think there is free will, then there is some definition of effort that is not affected by circumstances. Then it becomes a matter of empirical identification of the variable. Okay, but yeah, conceptually that's fine. The second, it was a comment. I agree with you. That's it's important. Yeah.
Well, my turn. On the same topic, when you are little, everything is circumstance to you. So this difference between effort and circumstances diminished or disappeared. Is that what you think?
Definitely. In fact, I wrote a review paper on a famous book, which is the one by Paris Barros and others, in which they propose this human opportunity index for many Latin American countries, in which they measure the degree of inequality opportunity for child functionings in many spaces. My comment was, it's completely fair and useful as a descriptive exercise to measure how the inequality for children depends on the background of the family, depends on the location, so on. But let's not call it equality in the sense that for children, everything is equal opportunity. Because, also at the legal level, we don't make them responsible for their actions. So I think that any inequality at a certain age, of course, then is a matter of political agreement to say what is the age. But below a certain age, everything should be considered equal opportunity. So that is my view. So any inequality among children is equal opportunity.
But are you planning to do that with your data set, just to estimate inequality of opportunity for younger people?
Then we have adults. We consider adults population. In fact, we had a lot of discussion of what should be the threshold, 18, 17, but that's the idea. We only have adult population there.
Another question is more general. The policy dialogue. I remember Miles Korak said that we should change the focus on equality of opportunity to lack, that the lack is unfair, etc., but changing the focus to make this more policy palatable. What are your thoughts?
In political philosophy, this approach is called lack egalitarianism. So, in a sense, they use lack to describe what we describe as equality of opportunity. They call it lack egalitarianism. Of course, then distinguish different kind of lack, brute lack, option lacks, and so on and so forth. But I'm not an expert of social communication. This is more a matter of. Conceptually, if the two things at the definition level, they are the same. So for me, as an economist, they don't make a difference. In terms of social communication, I'm not an expert. So I'm not in a position. It could be more. If Miles Kovac says so, maybe he's right. So, yeah.
Rodolfo.
Yes, a question about policy. How does optimal taxation and optimal expenditure changes if you focus on diminishing inequality of opportunity? What would be the difference with traditional taxation policy or expenditure policy?
Yeah, the predictions that we have here is so that the normative, let's say, statement we make here is that once we identify not only the degree of inequality opportunity in a country, but we also identify what are the factors which are more responsible for that inequality opportunity, then of course the prescription is to focus on those factors. So if you find that the gender is the most effective factor, so you should focus on gender inequality. If you realize that the locus of the region of birth is the most effective factor, you should focus on inequality between regions, and so on. So if you look at the family background, then you should invest on education in the first years of school, and so on and so forth. So according to the contribution of inequality opportunity, the way I see it, is that it gives you a summary measure that can be used to monitor social progress, the same way as inequality or poverty is used. Then from the measure of inequality, the measure of poverty, you don't have the precise policy prescriptions. You have to go further, in details to understand what you should do. The same is with inequality opportunity. So an inequality opportunity of, let's say, 60% that has increased in the last 10 years gives you a message. Look, in Mexico, we are doing badly, okay? So this is a message. Then to understand what are the policy prescriptions, we have to go in details. So what are the factors more important? So is gender. Okay, then you go and you start the gender inequality. Why is that? So this requires other analysis, of course, But the contribution of this literature is to give you an index of social progress that, together with others, gives you an alarm. Gives you one way to monitor what's happening at aggregate level. But then, of course, to understand what is the best taxation model, you need to do tax analysis.
Thank you, Vito. We're running out of time, so we will stop now. I have one question, but I can ask it to you later. So Isidro, please. Thank you very much, Vito.
Muchas gracias a todos. Muchas gracias, Vito. Qué gusto. Como son 10 años, hemos rompido el chanchito y tenemos un pequeño presente para los ponentes invitados. Es un café, o sea, mientras dure el café, Vito, te vas a acordar de nosotros. Roberto siempre, porque le damos bagging siempre, pero están a un coffee break ahora, tenemos las sesiones paralelas que terminan a la 1, están chonchas, va a ser difícil elegir a cuál ir, ojalá tengamos buenas experiencias. Los que están invitados a comer, después, ¿qué cosa? Y tenemos, ¿dónde está? ¿Puedes poner el que teníamos atrás? Acá nuestra experta en redes sociales nos pide